There's a group from our faith community that gathers each Wednesday at noon in our fellowship hall for Bible study. We share our concerns and prayers and the things that are going on in our lives, and then we open up the scriptures and we explore them together. Now, sometimes we are very serious about this endeavor, and sometimes, honestly, we laugh more than we'd ever expect. We have a great time building community with one another around our common faith and our desire to grow spiritually. Now, last week with that group, we were finishing up a study in the Gospel of Luke, and the focus passage for the day was from Luke chapter 24, when the resurrected Jesus appears to two of his followers on the road to Emmaus. You probably remember the story. The two travelers are talking about everything that has happened in Jerusalem with the crucifixion and the sorrow and the confusion that it made them feel. On top of that, they have heard from the women who went to the tomb that Jesus' body wasn't where it was supposed to be, and that those women have had a vision of two angels who have told them that Jesus had actually risen from the dead. Now, they go on to say that so much of their confusion is based in the fact that they had hoped that Jesus would be the one to restore the kingdom of Israel, which didn't happen, at least not in the way that they expected it to. Now, as I've studied that passage to preach it or teach it in various settings in different ways, I keep coming back to the one phrase where they say, "We had hoped." I mean, that's it, isn't it? They hadn't just lost a friend or a teacher, or even one that they thought would be a certain type of Messiah. They had lost a particular hope. Really, they were feeling a sense of loss because Jesus hadn't lived up to their expectations. And now that seems to be at the heart of the human experience with God. We expect God to be certain things for us, or do certain things for us, or act in certain ways. But God isn't bound by our expectations. Instead, God has a far greater will and design for the world and for our individual lives within it. So when Jesus appears to these travelers, he opens up for them what the Hebrew Scriptures, our Old Testament, said about what the Messiah would do and be, and how the Messiah would bring about God's kingdom for the world. And it is a far greater thing than simply restoring an earthly kingdom. It seems to me, as you read through that passage, that Jesus recognizes that even as they studied and listened to him, they didn't fully receive everything with a full sense of openness. They were limited in their understanding, maybe by their personal expectations or their cultural expectations, and all of those understandings that they had inherited from the generations before them about what the Messiah was supposed to be. It reminds me of how important openness is when we study the Scriptures, and how constantly reflecting on where the lessons of Scripture formed our lived experiences are, so that we can truly see what God is doing, often in surprising ways. If we've lived long enough, we probably know that when we think we have God completely figured out, something will happen in our lives that will leave us heartbroken and confused, just like those disciples were. But God is God and we are not. And we have to be open to God working in ways that challenge and reshape our understanding of who God is. So we have to remain open. We also have to be in a regular pattern of reflecting on how God is at work in our lives. I mean, this is crucial. We have to reflect on where we see God at work and how we are growing in our understanding of who God is in good times, or at least in times that are simply neutral, because we will need to cling to those moments to remind us that God is still at work when we find ourselves in times of hardship and pain, and especially in times of grief and loss. The disciples on the road to Emmaus were so heartbroken and confused that they couldn't even recognize Jesus when he was standing right in front of them and walking with them. It's hard for us to remember that God is at work when we are heartbroken and confused, or simply anxious and stressed. If we were constantly reflecting on God's work in our lives, constantly aware of God's presence with us, well, those times wouldn't shake us to the core nearly as much, I don't think. Maybe try a little theological reflection for yourself today. Set an intention to be open to God's presence and work in your life today. And then check in with yourself at the end of the morning. Maybe as you're eating lunch, think about where you've seen God in your life and in your day so far, or how God might have been speaking to you to that point. Maybe even write those things down and give thanks for them. And then do it again before you go to sleep tonight. Reflect on how God was with you throughout your entire day. And pray that tomorrow you will be even more open and in tune to God's presence with you. Start doing that on a regular basis. And if you do, I think you'll start to see that God is at work all around you. And when you experience those difficult times in life, reflect on what you expected and whether or not God might have promised you something else all along, maybe even something better that you really needed. Regardless of expectation, God has promised to be with us in all things. Remember that and acknowledge that through regular reflection, and that will likely make those challenging times easier to bear. You'll remember that God is still at work in the world and in your life, and that no matter what you face, God will see you through it to the end. Have a great week. I look forward to connecting with you again soon.